Thanks. We'll now turn over the floor to Undersecretary General Liu Zhenmin. Undersecretary General, you have the floor.
Thank you, Farhan. I thank Stephen for inviting me to be, and my colleagues to be here. Dear colleagues from the press, good afternoon. You know that the 2020 High-Level Operating Forum for Sustainable Development opened today, and it will last until the Thursday of next week. It is altogether 8 days. You should know that this is the most, in my view, it's the most important intergovernmental event for the year in 2020 until the forthcoming General Assembly opens. And I had the honor to present the Secretary General's report. The full title of the report is Sustainable Development Goals Report 2020 at the beginning of this High-Level Operating Forum. Now, I had a great pleasure to be with you today to launch the report. My colleagues, we're now 1/3 of the way into our goal to meet the SDGs by 2030. Now we're in the 5th year to achieve the 2030 agenda. This report provides an authoritative picture of how far we have progressed in this time, making use of the very latest data and estimates. Unfortunately, the news is not good. Even before the pandemic, the world was not fully on track to meet the goals. And then now with the COVID-19, the news is worse. There had been some progress. Maternal and child health was improving, access to electricity was expanding, and women's representation in government was increasing. But in many cases, even these advances were too slow. At the same time, food insecurity was rising. The natural environment continued to deteriorate, and the inequalities remained both persistent and pervasive. The report shows how COVID-19 is having a catastrophic impact on efforts to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. The pandemic has disrupted implementation efforts for many of the SDGs, and in some cases, is threatening to turn back the progress that many have worked hard to achieve over the past years. In particular, you can see that although the virus has impacted everyone, it has not done so equally. Indeed, it is the world's poorest and most vulnerable who are being affected the most. As a result of COVID-19, an estimated 71 million people are expected to be pushed back into extreme poverty in 2020. This would be the first rise in global poverty in over 20 years. COVID-19 is already affecting vulnerable workers in the informal economy, who make up half of the global workforce. With underemployment and unemployment all rising. And it is increasing the vulnerability of the world's 1 billion slum dwellers. Women and children are among those most affected. Indeed, COVID-19 is a global crisis that requires a global response. That is why governments and stakeholders are gathered here at the High-Level Operating Forum on Sustainable Development to accelerate action and a transformative pathway to achieve Sustainable Development Goals. Their continued commitment will ensure that recovery leads to a safer, more equal, inclusive, and sustainable world for all. At the same time, our response to COVID-19 should also serve to address global climate change, which, as this report highlights, is happening much faster than anticipated. the year 2019 was the second warmest on record and end of the warmest decade of 2010 to 2019. Dear colleagues, timely and disaggregated data and statistics are vital for the design and implementation of effective and equitable measures and policies. This is now more important than ever. Even though the pandemic has caused considerable interruptions to data and statistical operations, the global statistical community has acted quickly. It has put the necessary response mechanisms in place to ensure continued data collection. However, leadership and support are needed to ensure that the statistical institutions have the tools and the resources to continue to operate. It is vital to inform both the immediate response to the pandemic and the ongoing delivery of the 2030 agenda. In closing, let us remember, as we commemorate the 75th anniversary of the United Nations this year, that the commitment to the purposes and principles of the United Nations and the 2030 agenda remains strong. That is why the COVID-19 pandemic is a stark reminder of the need for global cooperation and solidarity. It is a reminder to strengthen our efforts to leave no one behind and to forge the transformative pathways needed to create a more reliable world. Thank you. This is the end of my presentation.
Thank you very much, Mr. Liu. And the next speaker we have is Francesca Perucci of the Statistical Services Branch of the Department of Economic and Social Affairs. Ms. Perucci, the floor is yours.
Thank you, and good afternoon, colleagues from the press. As we heard, the pandemic has upended the status quo as we move forward into the implementation of the SDGs. But the pandemic has also shown us how good data can help governments' effective response to the crisis. In some cases, making the difference between being able or not to prevent the loss of many lives. Good data on cases and deaths have been a critical tool for governments to contain and manage the pandemic. Data have also helped understand the underlying drivers of the disease, who's most at risk, and how we can prevent or be better prepared for the next crisis or disaster. And data on the social and economic impact have been essential to reach those in need and start planning for a recovery that leads to a safer, more equal, inclusive, and sustainable world for all. As the report highlights, reducing the risk of future disasters and getting closer to achieving the goals will require leadership, foresight, innovation, finance, and collaboration among all governments and all stakeholders. But all this will not be possible without data. An analysis of the data availability for the global SDG indicators reveals that for 4 of the 17 goals, less than half of the countries have internationally comparable data. Excuse me. This lack of country-level data is particularly worrisome for some areas, like Goal 5 on gender equality, where on average only about 4 in 10 countries have data available, and in areas related to sustainable production and consumption and to climate action. In addition, a large number of SDG indicators are available only with a significant time lag. In at least half of countries, the latest data point available for poverty-related indicators, Goal 1, is for 2016 or even earlier. A similar situation is found in indicators for Goal 5, gender equality, sustainable cities, Goal 11, and Goal 16 on peace, justice, and strong institutions. And now that data is more important than ever before, the crisis is disrupting routine operations throughout the global statistical and data system. A recent survey conducted by the United Nations and the World Bank shows that 96% of national statistical offices have partially or fully stopped face-to-face data collection. In sub-Saharan Africa, 97% of countries surveyed indicated that the production of regular statistics has been affected. Around the world, statisticians and data experts have been working to ensure operational continuity by adapting and innovating data production methods and processes to deliver the much needed data. These initiatives need to be scaled up if we are to fully inform policy responses to the crisis and support SDG acceleration efforts over the coming decades. As highlighted in the report, the COVID-19 pandemic is not only creating a massive setback in the realization of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, but it is also exacerbating global data inequalities. 9 in 10 national statistical offices in low and lower middle income countries have seen funding cuts, and 73 offices, 61% of respondents, expressed the need for external support in addressing challenges associated with COVID-19. If these needs are not filled, they will have a lasting effect on countries' ability to produce timely and disaggregated data for a large number of SDG indicators in the near future. At the forthcoming UN World Data Forum, to be held as a virtual event from 18th to 21st of October this year, data experts and users will come together to explore and agree on new data solutions and discuss strategies for more and better funding of data so that all decisions can be based on evidence. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Ms. Perucci. And then our third and final speaker before we turn over to questions will be Yongyi Min, the Chief of the Sustainable Development Goals Monitoring Section of DESA. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm pleased to join you today to share some key findings from the Sustainable Development Goals Report 2020. The report tracks progress towards the SDG before the pandemic started. It also looks at some of the devastating initial impacts of COVID-19 on specific goals and targets. For Goal 1, before COVID-19, the pace of global poverty reduction was decelerating, and the poverty rate was projected at 6% in 2030. The global goal of ending poverty by 2030 will be missed. COVID-19 is pushing an estimated 71 million of people back into extreme poverty in 2020, caused the first increase of global poverty in more than 20 years. In Goal 2, an estimated 2 billion people were affected by moderate or severe food insecurity in 2018. This is an increase of 3% from 2014. Along with conflict, climate shocks, and the locust crisis, the pandemic posed an additional threat to food systems, affecting the most vulnerable populations. In Goal 3, we see progress in many health areas, such as improving maternal and child health, in increasing coverage of immunization, and in reducing some infectious diseases continues. But the rate of improvement has slowed down. The COVID-19 is overwhelming health systems globally. Disrupted health services and life-saving intervention will cause hundreds of thousands of additional under-5 deaths, and a spike in illness and deaths from communicable and non-communicable diseases. In SDG 4, progress towards inclusive and equitable quality education was too slow. Over 200 million children will still be out of school in 2030. School closure because of COVID-19 affect over 90% of world student population. Disrupted education is adversely affecting learning outcomes and the social and behavioral development of children and youth. In Goal 5, the commitment to advancing gender equality has brought about improvement in some areas, such as child marriage, women's representation in leadership roles. But full gender equality remains unfulfilled. The pandemic is hitting women and girls hard. Domestic violence against women and children is rising in many countries, increased by 30% in some countries. Globally, in 2017, 2.2 billion people lacked safely managed drinking water, 4.2 billion lacked safely managed sanitation, and 3 billion people lacked soap and water at home. Water, sanitation, and hand wash facilities are critical to prevent COVID-19 spreading. Yet 40% of healthcare facilities were still not equipped to practice hand hygiene. The pandemic is pushing the world into the worst economic crisis since the Great Depression. We can expect the biggest increase in global unemployment since World War II. The aviation and tourism industries will likely suffer the steepest decline in their histories. The global recession could constrict aid flow to developing countries, and remittances to low and middle income countries are projected to fall by 20% in 2020. And the COVID crisis is hitting the poorest and the most vulnerable of people hardest. It significantly affects the livelihood of 1.6 billion of informal sector workers. As the school closes and the more families fall into extreme poverty, children in poor and disadvantaged communities are at much greater risk of child labor, child marriage, and child trafficking. In fact, the global gains in reducing child labor are likely to be reversed for the first time in 20 years. In short, the crisis may have life-altering consequences for millions of children and youth worldwide. So climate change is happening much more quickly than anticipated. Global temperatures are on track to rise as much as 3.2 degrees Celsius by the end of the century. To meet the 1.5 degree target called for in the Paris Agreement, greenhouse gas emissions must begin falling by 7.6% each year, starting in 2020. However, despite the drastic reduction in human activity due to the COVID-19 crisis, the resulting 6% drop in emission projected for 2020 falls short of this target, and emissions are expected to rise as restrictions are lifted. The world continues on the path of using natural resources unsustainably. By the end of this century, 100 to 150% rise in ocean acidity is projected, affecting half of all marine life. The report has also one section focused on the 2020 targets and provides assessment in traffic light colors. By the end of 2020, 21 of the 169 SDG targets will mature, of which 12 are linked to the UN CBD Aichi biodiversity targets. Despite some progress, the world is falling short on 2020 targets to halt biodiversity loss. So for more information, please visit the full report and the database on our website. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'd like to thank Yongyi, Francesca Perucci, and Liu Zhenmin for their opening remarks. And I'll turn the floor over to questions. And please let me know through the chat function whether you have a question you'd want to ask. And the first question goes to Edie Lederer from AP. Edie.
Thank you very much on behalf of the United Nations Correspondents Association. Thank you for doing this interesting briefing. I have a couple of questions. Ambassador Liu, Undersecretary General Liu, if COVID-19 is playing a catastrophic role, particularly in terms of impacting the world's poorest and most vulnerable, with countries struggling so much economically, what can the United Nations do to try and keep the goals from reversing so drastically? And for Ms. Perucci, I was sort of astounded that even on something like gender equality, you only have data from 4 in 10 countries, and that some data you have is almost 5 years old. I know you talked about some UN projects, but what more can be done to sort of get every single country to provide updated data. Thank you.
Undersecretary General Liu, would you like to go first?
Yes, yes, Farhan. Actually, the question from Yidi, we're speaking also for UNCA colleagues, I think definitely, I think the world poorest and vulnerable countries, vulnerable groups, has been to the special concern of the Secretary General and to the UN system. Of course, I think that's why we're talking that the COVID-19 pandemic has affected everyone, but not equally. I think that these poorest groups, poor countries, and vulnerable groups, they are affected more serious than others. I think from a UN perspective view, we have mobilized our UN system, mobilized our UN country teams, trying to provide the first policy advice to those countries on how they should be prepared in cope with the pandemic. Second, I think we use the UN system resources and also technology resources and other resources to try to provide assistance to those countries. Third, I think the Secretary trying hard to mobilize international support to help these countries to avoid that there would be a kind of explosion of the pandemic. I think now they seem that the global north they be suffering the pandemic surge. Of course, most worrisome to the Secretary General and to the UN system how we could avoid the kind of explosion in the global south. That's why I think that we should continue to mobilize international support to the global south, to developing countries, especially those countries are mostly affected from seed countries, LDC countries, and as well as landlocked developing countries. Thank you.
And Ms. Perucci?
Yes, thank you, and thanks for the question. What more can we do to improve the data? Well, I would list in order. Number one, political commitment. It's important to promote political commitment to have data high up on the agenda when we're in the implementation of our policies and measures, both at the national and the international level. Number two, mobilize international resources. Not all countries can do this alone, and they need support, and they need the international, both financial and technical international support. Number three, we have to leverage innovation, and we've seen the results, and we've seen it very clearly with the experience through COVID-19. There is so much we can do with using new technology, with using alternative data collection systems, and to establish partnerships with private sector, civil society, using geospatial data, integrating geospatial systems and statistics. So bringing all these different parts of the system together. And lastly, I would say assigning a stronger role to national statistical offices and promoting and enabling them to modernize and to play the role of service providers so that they can really bring together all these different parts of the system and provide the data we need. Thank you.
Thanks. I'll now turn the floor over to Gloria Starkins. Gloria?
There's a lot of movement today of pensioners, older people who are living in big cities who feel their lives are threatened by the virus and by the various illnesses that are occurring. Isn't there a way for ecotourism to help some of the countries, their tourism, by suggesting their wide open spaces where it's perfectly safe for them to be? There's very, very little of the COVID virus. This would help the economy.
Anyone's free to respond.
Yes, let me try. I think definitely the tourism has been dramatically affected globally. I think for those developing countries, small and developing countries, I think it be because they have kind of so-called tourism-dependent economy, like I think some Caribbean, some Indian Ocean, all the Pacific Ocean and the Pacific Island states. So it's I think it be this issue that be it's for the UN system through the UN World Tourism Organization. We're working closely. I think, but there are many factors affecting the resumption of tourism. It's not the issue of the countries themselves. I think which they are prepared to receive the return of the tourists, but also international traffic, international aviation. I think resumption of international aviation. So there are many issues. So that's why we're talking to be the SDGs. They are interconnected, and the impact they are more dimensional and comprehensive. I think that be most urgent. Be we need to mobilize the international effort to contain the pandemic, to enable that it be international traffic, especially aviation traffic, could resume very soon. Then that will help many of the countries, including those tourism-dependent countries. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Are there any other people with questions? I don't see any hands raised. Please let me know if you have any questions. Keep the floor open for a little bit, waiting to see whether anyone's going to speak up. Still see nothing. Although our colleague Carrie Newton says thanks a lot for this interesting talk, so thanks for your input. And I would once more like to thank our guests, Undersecretary General Liu Zhenmin, Francesca Perucci, and Yongyi Min. Thank you very much for this interesting presentation and for taking our questions. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Farhan, and thank you, colleagues for press. Thank you very much. Thank you. We're looking forward to your support. Thank you. Wish you all the well. Thank you. Bye-bye.
And a reminder to the press that the press briefing at 1 o'clock that was scheduled for UNAIDS has been canceled. Thanks and have a good afternoon.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.